Some cases follow you home, but this one never let me leave in the first place. I'm Detective Angela Russo, and I've been working undercover ops for the Pennsylvania State Police for 8 years. You get used to the fake identities, the cover stories, the constant performance. What you don't get used to is when reality itself starts performing back at you. The Centralia assignment was supposed to be routine, a 3-week infiltration of Meridian Logistics, a shipping company operating suspiciously close to the old coal fire zones. Internal Affairs had received tips about possible human trafficking, workers disappearing from the night shift, unusual cargo manifests. Standard stuff for a company that chose to set up shop in a place most people had forgotten existed. Centralia isn't quite a ghost town, but it's close. The underground coal seam has been burning since 1962, pumping smoke and toxic gases through cracks in the earth. Most residents left decades ago when the government condemned their homes. What's left is a handful of stubborn holdouts, cracked highways that lead nowhere, and companies like Meridian that take advantage of cheap real estate and minimal oversight. The kind of place where you can make things disappear without anyone asking questions. My cover was simple. Angela Martinez, recently laid off from a warehouse job in Scranton, desperate enough to take night security work in the middle of nowhere. I had the backstory memorized, the fake references, even a carefully constructed social media history. Meridian hired me over the phone without even running a background check. First red flag. The facility sat on the edge of what used to be the town center, a squat concrete building surrounded by a chain-link fence and empty parking lots. During the day, maybe a dozen workers came and went, loading trucks with unmarked boxes. At night, it was just me and whatever was supposed to arrive at 3:17. My first week was uneventful. I walked my rounds, checked doors, monitored the loading dock cameras from a small office that smelled like cigarettes and industrial coffee. The previous security guard, a guy named Tommy Breslin, had left detailed notes about patrol routes and protocols, but his handwriting got shakier as the pages went on. The final entry, dated just 2 days before I started, was a single line. It came again, same time. Nobody believes me. I started asking the day shift workers about deliveries. Most shrugged or changed the subject, but a forklift operator named Danny Kovac pulled me aside during shift change. He was maybe 25, with the kind of hollow-eyed look you see in people who work too many doubles. "You see anything weird yet?" he asked, glancing around the parking lot like something might be listening. "Weird how?" "The truck. 3:17 every night. Same white box truck. No plates, no company markings. It backs up to Dock 7, sits there for maybe 10 minutes, then drives off. Deliveries happen at night sometimes," I said. "Maybe it's scheduled maintenance or something." Danny shook his head. "I checked the manifests going back 6 months. Nothing scheduled for 3:17, nothing scheduled for Dock 7 after hours, period. But the truck keeps coming." That night, I positioned myself in the office with a clear view of Dock 7 and waited. The minutes crawled by with the weight of all that empty building around me. Underground, the coal seam burned on, invisible but constant, like a fever in the earth. Through the windows, I could see the orange glow it cast against the low clouds, turning the night sky the color of old blood. At 3:16, I heard an engine. Deep diesel growl getting louder. I grabbed the binoculars from my desk and focused on the loading dock. A white box truck rolled into view, backing toward Dock 7 with practiced precision. No license plates, just like Danny said. No company logos. The driver was a shadow behind tinted glass. I checked the security monitors. Every camera showed empty lots, empty roads. The Dock 7 feed displayed nothing but concrete and shadows, even though I could see the truck's headlights reflecting off the building's metal siding through my office window. The truck sat there for exactly 10 minutes. I timed it. Then it pulled away, engine fading into the distance. When I ran outside to check, Dock 7 was empty. No tire tracks in the gravel. No exhaust smell. Nothing. I spent the rest of my shift reviewing security footage from every angle. 17 different cameras, all showing the same thing. Empty lots at 3:17 a.m. But I know what I saw. The next morning, I called my handler, Sergeant Rivera, and reported the incident. She told me to document everything and stay focused on the primary investigation. Sometimes cover stories require believing impossible things, she said. Don't lose sight of why you're there. But the impossible kept multiplying. Workers started avoiding me during shift change. Conversations dying when I walked into the break room. I found more notes from Tommy Breslin, hidden in desk drawers, stuffed behind filing cabinets. His handwriting deteriorated with each entry. Third week, truck came again, tried following. Lost it on Centralia Road. Month 2, asked dispatch about deliveries, they hung up. Nobody will talk about Dock 7, they know something. The final note was different. Fresher paper, different ink. Angela, if that's really your name, stop looking for the truck. It's looking for you now. I hadn't told anyone my cover name except my handler. That night, I set up my phone to record while I waited. 3:16 came and went. No engine sounds. No truck. I checked the monitors, all clear. Then, at 3:17 exactly, my phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. Dock 7, come alone. I should have called for backup. Should have reported the compromise. Instead, I walked to Dock 7 with my service weapon drawn and my phone recording everything. The loading dock was empty, but someone had spray-painted numbers on the concrete. Coordinates. They led to an address in the old Centralia residential district, in the heart of the burn zone. 20 minutes later, I was driving down a road that officially didn't exist anymore, following GPS coordinates that led to a street the state had condemned 30 years ago. Smoke rose from cracks in the asphalt like incense from some buried cathedral. The air tasted of sulfur and burning metal. The address led to a foundation hole where a house used to stand. Basement stairs descended into darkness that moved wrong, shifting like water when my flashlight beam hit it. At the bottom of the stairs, I found them. Files. Hundreds of police files scattered across a concrete floor that was warm to the touch. Missing persons reports dating back decades. Photos of people who looked exactly like the day shift workers at Meridian. Same faces, same clothes, same ID badge photos. But the reports were from 1973, 1986, 1994. In the center of the room sat a dispatch radio, crackling with static. As I approached, a voice came through. My own voice, filing a report about a missing security guard named Angela Martinez. The timestamp read, 3 months in the future. I ran. Left the files, left my phone recording in that basement, left my cover intact and my investigation incomplete. Drove straight to the state police barracks and told Rivera everything. She listened with the expression of someone who'd heard this story before. The Centralia assignment is officially closed, she said, sliding a transfer order across her desk. You're being reassigned to narcotics in Philadelphia, effective immediately. What about Meridian? The missing workers? What missing workers? According to our files, the investigation found no evidence of criminal activity. Case closed. I checked the evidence locker later that night. Empty. No files on Meridian Logistics. No missing persons reports matching the faces I'd seen. No record of an undercover operation in Centralia. According to the system, Detective Angela Russo had been working narcotics for 3 months. But every night at 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number. Always the same message. Your shift isn't over. And sometimes, when the city gets quiet enough, I can still smell sulfur and burning coal, even here in Philadelphia. 100 miles from that hole in the ground where nothing was supposed to be burning anymore. The underground fires in Centralia are expected to burn for another 250 years. That's a long shift, even for someone who's already dead. I never found out what was in those trucks. I'm not sure I want to know. Some cases close you instead of the other way around. Some shifts never end. They just transfer to different precincts, different covers, different lies you tell yourself about what you saw in the dark. The last entry in Tommy Breslin's notes, the one I didn't mention before. Day shift doesn't remember night shift. Night shift doesn't remember day shift. Nobody remembers leaving. The company doesn't exist on Tuesdays. I looked it up. Meridian Logistics has no business registration in Pennsylvania. Never did. But the building's still there. And according to the power company, someone's still paying the electric bill. The security cameras still record empty lots at 3:17 every morning. And somewhere in the file system, there's a missing persons report for Detective Angela Russo, filed yesterday by a sergeant who doesn't exist at a precinct that was closed in 1993. The shift never ended. It just moved underground, like everything else in Centralia, burning slow and patient in the dark, waiting for the next person stupid enough to punch in and think they're working a regular job in a regular town where regular rules apply. But they don't, not in places where the earth itself refuses to stop burning, not in towns where the dead still clock in for their shifts and the living learn too late that some assignments you can never quit. The coal will burn for 2.5 centuries. The trucks will keep coming. And somewhere in that basement full of files and sulfur smoke, the radio keeps broadcasting reports from the future about cases that can't be closed because they were never really open to begin with. The dead frequency started broadcasting 3 weeks before I realized I was already too late to stop listening. I'm Officer Miguel Santos, California Highway Patrol, and I've been working undercover assignments along the Northern California coast for 6 years. Point Reyes was supposed to be a straightforward infiltration suspected drug runners using the lighthouse area's fog cover and isolated beaches to move product inland. The DEA had intercepted fragments of radio chatter suggesting coordinated drops, but nothing concrete enough for warrants. That's where Undercover comes in. Get close, document the operation, build a case that sticks. Point Reyes sits at the edge of the world, where the Pacific crashes against cliffs that have been crumbling into the sea for thousands of years. The lighthouse has been guiding ships away from these rocks since 1870. Automated now, but still sweeping its beam across waters that swallow vessels without explanation. It's the kind of place where people go to disappear, either by choice or by accident. Perfect for smuggling operations if you can navigate the currents and fog banks that roll in like clockwork every evening. My cover was simple: Ray Gutierrez, unemployed fisherman from Eureka, looking for work with the local crews that operated out of Drake's Bay. The fishing community is tight-knit, but practical. They'll take on anyone who can handle seasickness and doesn't ask too many questions about what's really in the nets. Within a week, I was crewing on the Maria Dolores, a 30-foot charter boat captained by Jake Hensley, a weathered ex-Navy man who ran legitimate fishing trips during the day and something else entirely after dark. The crew was small, just me, Hensley, and a local kid named Connor Webb, who handled equipment and kept the boat running. Webb was maybe 19, with the kind of nervous energy you see in people who know more than they're telling. He spent most of his time monitoring radio equipment that seemed too sophisticated for a fishing operation, scanning frequencies with the focused attention of an air traffic controller. The first strange thing I noticed was the radio discipline. These weren't guys casually coordinating drug drops. They followed naval communication protocols, used call signs, and maintained radio silence during specific time windows. More like a military operation than a criminal one. On my second week aboard the Maria Dolores, Webb started acting different. Jumpy, constantly checking his equipment, writing in a notebook he kept locked in a waterproof case. During a fog bank that reduced visibility to maybe 10 feet, I heard him muttering coordinates into his headset coordinates that, when I checked later, led to open ocean 50 miles offshore. "Who you talking to out there?" I asked. Standard maritime check-in, Webb said, but his hands were shaking. Coast Guard wants to know our position. I'd monitored Coast Guard frequencies during my training. They don't use the numbers Webb was broadcasting. That night, anchored in Drake's Bay, while fog thick as wool settled around us, Webb picked up something on his scanner. A voice, clear and professional, broadcasting what sounded like a police report. Highway Patrol responding to fatal collision, southbound 101 at Petaluma Boulevard. 3 vehicles involved, estimate 4 fatalities. Requesting coroner and additional units. That's weird, Webb said. Accident report, but it's coming in on maritime frequency. I checked my phone. No news alerts about any accident. I called the CHP dispatch center in Santa Rosa. No incidents reported on 101. No fatalities in Petaluma. But the broadcast kept repeating. Every 15 minutes, same voice, same details. We listened for 3 hours until the fog lifted and Hensley ordered us back to port. The next morning, I woke up to news alerts. Fatal collision on southbound 101 at Petaluma Boulevard. 3 vehicles, 4 fatalities. Time of accident, 7:32 p.m. The exact time we'd first heard the broadcast. I started recording everything. Webb's radio equipment, the frequencies he monitored, the coordinates he transmitted. What I found made me question whether we were investigating criminals or something that made criminals look like choir boys. The broadcasts weren't random. They followed patterns, schedules, almost like a dispatch center for events that hadn't happened yet. Missing persons reports dated 3 days in the future. Armed robbery details that wouldn't occur for a week. Murder investigations that provided suspect descriptions before the victims had even disappeared. Webb noticed me paying too much attention to his equipment. "You're not a fisherman," he said during our 3rd week out. "Fishermen don't take notes on radio frequencies." "Just curious about the tech," I said. "Never seen equipment like this." Neither had we, until it washed up in our nets 2 months ago. Webb opened his waterproof case and showed me a hand-drawn map of the coastline marked with X's and timestamps. Whatever's broadcasting from out there, it's not using any frequency the FCC recognizes. We've been trying to triangulate the source. "Why?" "Because," said Hensley, appearing from the wheelhouse, "the broadcasts aren't just predicting crimes. They're predicting how to stop them. And something doesn't want us listening." He handed me a folder full of printed radio transcripts, coordinates for drug drops that led police to empty locations, descriptions of smuggling operations that resulted in arrests before any contraband arrived. Criminal conspiracies detailed with enough specificity to prevent them entirely. "We're not smugglers," Hensley said. "We're trying to figure out what's sending these messages and why it wants certain crimes to fail." That's when I noticed the pattern I should have seen from the beginning. Every predicted crime involved human trafficking. Every prevented operation was moving people, not drugs. And according to the timestamps, the broadcasts had started the same week that 3 fishing vessels had disappeared off Point Reyes without distress calls or debris fields. Webb's equipment crackled to life. Coast Guard responding to distress call from fishing vessel Maria Dolores. Last known position 37 degrees 58 minutes north, 123 degrees 02 minutes west. All hands presumed lost. We checked our GPS. Those were our exact coordinates. "That broadcast isn't scheduled for another 6 hours, Webb whispered, reading from his notebook. Hensley was already starting the engine. "We need to get back to port. Now." But the fog was rolling in again, thicker than anything I'd experienced. The lighthouse beam couldn't penetrate it. Our navigation equipment showed impossible readings, depth sounders indicating we were simultaneously in 6 feet of water and 600 feet GPS coordinates, placing us in 3 different locations at once. Through the fog, we heard engines, multiple vessels, moving in formation, broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The voices were professional, calm, reporting criminal activities with the precision of experienced dispatchers. but the crimes they described were happening to us in real time. Highway Patrol Officer Miguel Santos has been monitoring unauthorized radio transmissions for 3 weeks. One voice reported, "Suspect is armed and should be considered dangerous to ongoing operations." Webb looked at me with something between fear and pity. "You're not the first cop they've sent." The radio crackled again. "Previous undercover operations have resulted in temporal displacement. Recommend immediate extraction before subject becomes permanent broadcast source." Through the fog, I could see lights, not lighthouse beams or boat navigation lights, but something that moved wrong, floating at eye level with no visible source. The lights formed patterns, coordinates, timestamps for events I recognized from Webb's notebook, all the crimes that had been prevented by their radio monitoring. "The frequency isn't predicting the future," Webb said, adjusting his equipment with practiced hands. "It's broadcasting from it, from a timeline where those trafficking operations succeeded, where those people weren't saved." I understood then. The missing fishing vessels hadn't been lost. They'd been recruited, turned into relay stations for information that prevented horrors from reaching shore. The smuggling ring we'd been investigating didn't exist because the radio broadcasts had sabotaged it before it could form. The fog pressed closer, carrying voices that described my life with bureaucratic precision. My training, my assignment, my real name, my fear. One transmission detailed the report I would file about this operation, word for word, including my conclusions about temporal displacement and unauthorized radio sources. Another described the therapy sessions I'd need after returning to shore. "You can go back," Hensley said, his voice barely audible above the radio static. "File your report. Tell them the smuggling ring was a dead end. Or you can stay and help us keep listening. Keep preventing what's trying to reach the coast." Through the fog, I could see the lights moving closer. Not threatening, just persistent, patient, like radio operators waiting for acknowledgement of their transmissions. The last thing I remember clearly was making my choice. I must have made it, because I'm still here, monitoring frequencies that don't officially exist, preventing crimes that won't happen because we heard about them first. The Point Reyes Lighthouse still sweeps its beam across waters that hide more than rocks and reefs. Sometimes I get calls on my regular CHP radio, of dispatch asking for my location, my status, my estimated time of return. I give them coordinates that place me safely on Highway 1, completing a routine investigation that found no evidence of criminal activity. But I'm still here, in the fog that never lifts, listening to broadcasts from a future we're working to prevent. The marina in Drake's Bay shows the Maria Dolores as lost at sea with all hands. My supervisor closed the undercover operation after I filed a report stating the smuggling leads were unfounded. The frequency keeps broadcasting. We keep listening. And somewhere in the official record, Officer Miguel Santos returned safely from an unremarkable assignment that yielded no actionable intelligence. The dead frequency knows better. It knows I'm still here, part of the relay network now, helping to broadcast warnings to anyone willing to listen, preventing futures where the things trying to reach shore succeed. The fog never really lifts at Point Reyes, and the lighthouse beam that guides ships to safety also illuminates the vessels that shouldn't exist, carrying cargo that must never reach land. We monitor those frequencies, log those transmissions, and file reports that ensure the crimes we prevent remain invisible to the world that needs to stay ignorant about what we stopped. The radio keeps broadcasting, we keep listening, and the coast stays safe from futures that won't happen because we heard them coming first. The GPS showed the van was in 2 places at once, and that's when I knew we weren't tracking ordinary criminals. I'm Officer Rebecca Walsh, California Highway Patrol, and I've worked human trafficking cases for 7 years along the desert corridors where Interstate 10 meets forgotten highways that lead to forgotten places. The Salton Sea assignment came through the task force reports of missing persons last seen at motels around what used to be California's biggest lake before it turned into a toxic wasteland that smells like rotting fish and industrial runoff. The Salton Sea sits in the desert like a fever dream of better times. In the 1950s, it was supposed to be California's answer to Palm Beach luxury resorts, speedboat races, Hollywood celebrities posing on docks that jutted into water that sparkled blue under endless Sunday. Now it's a shrinking pool of agricultural runoff and dead tilapia, surrounded by abandoned motels with names like Desert Shores Inn and Paradise Palms that haven't seen paradise in 40 years. Perfect place to move people who don't want to be found, or who won't be missed when they disappear. My cover was Rebecca Torres, a bail bondswoman from San Diego tracking skips who'd last been seen in the Salton Sea area. It gave me legitimate reasons to visit motels, ask questions, and flash photos of missing persons. What it didn't explain was why every lead I followed seemed to dissolve the moment I got close to something real. The operation was run by a woman named Carol Vega, who managed the Desert Shores Inn, a single-story building with 30 rooms and a parking lot full of vehicles that never moved. Vega had the kind of tired professionalism you see in people who've learned not to ask questions about their guests' business. Cash only, no ID required. Check out whenever you want or don't. Perfect for transporting people who needed to disappear between point A and point B. The first week, I documented everything: license plates, check-in times, room assignments. Pattern recognition is basic police work, and patterns were everywhere. The same vehicles arrived every Tuesday and Friday, carrying passengers who checked into rooms but never seemed to leave them. Surveillance from across the highway showed people entering the motel, but thermal imaging couldn't detect anyone inside the occupied rooms. That's when I started noticing the GPS anomalies. I'd placed tracking devices on 3 suspect vehicles during routine bail bond conversations with Vega. The devices worked perfectly until the vehicles left the motel. Then they'd show impossible readings coordinates that placed them simultaneously at the Salton Sea and at destinations 300 miles away. The devices would go dark for exactly 6 hours, then reactivate when the vehicles returned to the motel, right on schedule. According to the tracking data, a van carrying 4 passengers had spent 6 hours in a location that didn't exist, traveling at speeds that would require flight, following routes that led through mountains and private property and restricted military zones. But the passengers always arrived at their intended destinations. And they always returned to the Desert Shores Inn exactly when the GPS said they should. I started checking missing persons databases, cross-referencing faces I'd photographed with active cases. The results made no sense. Maria Sandoval, reported missing from Fresno 3 months ago, was apparently making regular ATM withdrawals in Phoenix while simultaneously being transported by Vega's network. David Kim, missing from Los Angeles for 6 weeks, had been posting on social media from Seattle, while his tracking data showed him riding in the back of a van that wasn't really there. "You're asking a lot of questions for a bail bondswoman," Vega said during my second week. She'd approached me in the parking lot while I was documenting license plates. "Just being thorough. My clients don't like it when skips actually stay skipped." "Neither do mine." Vega handed me a room key. 27. "Your client checked in last night. Might want to have a conversation." Room 27 was at the far end of the building where the asphalt had cracked and weeds pushed through gaps like fingers reaching for air that wasn't poisoned. I knocked and identified myself. No answer. The door was unlocked. The room was empty, but the bed was disturbed. Personal belongings scattered on the dresser: wallet, cell phone, car keys. The wallet contained ID for James Fletcher, one of my alleged bail skips. The cell phone showed recent activity. Text messages sent from this room to family members, assuring them he was safe and would be in touch soon. But James Fletcher was sitting in the room. He was there and not there, like an afterimage burned into my retinas. I could see him in my peripheral vision, middle-aged man, Hispanic, wearing the same clothes described in his missing person report. But when I looked directly, the chair was empty. When I looked away, he was back, watching me with eyes that held too much knowledge. "You shouldn't be here," he said. Or maybe I just heard him say it. "This route isn't for people like you." I tried to respond, but my radio crackled to life. Dispatch calling my real name, my real badge number, reporting that Officer Rebecca Walsh had failed to check in from an assignment that officially didn't exist. I hadn't missed any check-ins. I'd been maintaining contact with my handler twice daily. Through the window, I could see the parking lot. The same vehicles I'd been tracking for 2 weeks, but now they were transparent, ghostly, occupied by passengers who flickered in and out of existence like bad television reception. The tracking devices were transmitting coordinates from inside the vehicles, but the coordinates kept changing, not moving from place to place, but existing in multiple places simultaneously. "The route leads where it needs to lead," Fletcher said. "Some people travel between worlds. Some people travel between times. We travel between the spaces where missing persons reports get filed." The room started to feel wrong. Not smaller, exactly, but like it existed in several dimensions at once. Through one wall, I could see another version of the same room where a different person sat in the chair, talking to a different version of me who wore a different uniform and carried different questions. Through another wall, the room was empty but recently occupied, with luggage and personal effects that belonged to people who wouldn't go missing for another 5 years. My tracking equipment showed impossible readings. According to the GPS, I was simultaneously at the Desert Shores Inn, driving on Interstate 10 near Indio, and sitting in a police station in San Diego, filing a report about an unsuccessful investigation. The timestamps were all different, spanning weeks, but they were all happening now. Vega appeared in the doorway. "The route isn't geographical," she said. "It's temporal. People don't disappear into space, they disappear into time, into the gaps between when they go missing and when someone notices they're gone." I understood then. The trafficking network wasn't moving people from place to place. It was moving them between the moments when their absence mattered and when it didn't. The missing persons reports were filed by families who remembered them leaving. The bank transactions were made by versions of them who had never left at all. And somewhere in between, they existed in a state that let them travel routes that couldn't be mapped because they didn't follow roads. The last thing I remember clearly was Fletcher standing up from his chair. Not threatening, just tired. "Some routes you choose," he said. "Others choose you. Depends on whether you're running toward something or away from it." My radio crackled one final time. Dispatch confirming that Officer Rebecca Walsh had completed her assignment and was returning to base. Case closed. No evidence of trafficking operations in the Salton Sea area. Recommend discontinuing surveillance. But I never left the Desert Shores Inn. According to my official records, I filed a comprehensive report stating that the trafficking leads were unfounded, requested transfer back to regular patrol, and took 2 weeks vacation time to recover from the stress of undercover work in hazardous conditions. The truth is different. I'm still here, checking into room 27 every night, monitoring routes that exist between seconds, documenting passengers who travel through time instead of space. My GPS shows me in multiple locations simultaneously: patrol car on Interstate 10, detective's desk in San Diego, missing person in a database somewhere, living person, making regular bank withdrawals to maintain the illusion that nothing has changed. The Salton Sea keeps shrinking, leaving behind salt flats and dead fish and the bones of resorts that promised paradise and delivered something else entirely. But the motels keep operating, and the routes keep running, and somewhere in the spaces between missing and found, people travel roads that don't appear on any map toward destinations that exist only when nobody's looking for them. The route that leads nowhere goes everywhere, if you know how to disappear into the time between leaving and arriving. And once you learn to travel that way, every destination becomes home. and every departure becomes permanent. The 911 call came from a building that hasn't had phone service since 1881. I'm Detective Tyler Morrison, Mono County Sheriff's Department, and I've been working the Eastern Sierra beat for 9 years. Most of our calls involve tourists who underestimate the desert, missing hikers, the occasional domestic disturbance in the scattered communities that dot Highway 395. What we don't usually get are reports of criminal activity inside Bodie State Historic Park, a ghost town preserved exactly as it was when the last residents abandoned it in the early 1900s. Bodie sits at 8,000 feet above sea level, where the high desert meets the mountains and the wind never stops. In its heyday, it was one of the roughest mining camps in the West. 30,000 people digging gold out of the Bodie Hills, spending their earnings on whiskey and violence and women who charged by the hour. By 1940, it was empty except for a caretaker family and buildings slowly surrendering to weather and time. Now it's a museum, preserved in a state of arrested decay, where nothing changes and nothing is supposed to happen. My cover assignment came through the Department of Parks and Recreation. Reports of vandalism, possible drug activity, and trespassing after hours had park officials requesting additional security. I'd be working as a seasonal ranger, living in park housing, monitoring the site during the quiet months when tourist visits dropped to almost nothing. Simple surveillance job, with good cover for investigating whatever was really happening after the park closed to the public each evening. The ranger station sat just outside the main town site, a modern building that felt alien compared to the weathered wood and rusted iron of the historic structures. My supervisor was Linda Hartwell, a 20-year park veteran who knew every story about every building and treated Bodie with the reverence of someone guarding a graveyard. She handed me keys, radio protocols, and a list of emergency numbers that included contacts for law enforcement, medical services, and what she called historical research consultants. Why would park rangers need historical consultants? I asked. You'll understand after your first week, Hartwell said. Bodie has authentication issues. The town itself was eerily well preserved. 170 buildings maintained exactly as they were found, with furniture, personal belongings, and business records still in place. Walking through the Standard Mill or the Methodist Church felt like stepping into a photograph, every detail frozen at the moment the last resident locked their door and walked away. During the day, with tourists and docent-led tours, it felt like any other historical site. After sunset, when the park closed and the gates locked, it felt like walking through someone else's memory. The first 911 call came on my third night. I was doing rounds at 11 p.m. when my radio crackled with dispatch traffic. Emergency call from Bodie. Possible assault in progress. Caller reporting from the Wheaton and Hollis Hotel. I knew the building 3-story brick structure on Main Street, preserved with original furniture and guest registers dating back to 1878. What I didn't know was how anyone could be calling from inside it. Unit 12 responding, I transmitted, following protocol. Dispatch, can you verify the caller's location? Confirmed 12. Call originated from 560 Main Street, Bodie. Landline connection. I drove to Main Street and parked outside the hotel. The building was locked, secured with modern deadbolts and motion sensors that connected to the park's central alarm system. No alerts, no indication anyone had entered. Through the windows, I could see the lobby exactly as tourists had left it. Velvet chairs, oil paintings, guest register open to a page dated March 15, 1880. My radio crackled again. Dispatch to Unit 12. Please respond to assault call. Victim reporting from Room 14. Wheaton and Hollis Hotel. I tried the front door. Locked. Tried the service entrance. Locked. Checked the motion sensors, all green. No movement detected for 6 hours. but dispatch was insisting they had an active emergency call from someone inside the building. Dispatch, I'm on scene. Building is secure. No signs of entry. Can you patch me through to the caller? Negative. 12. Caller disconnected. But we have another call now. Same location. Possible homicide. Room 7. I forced entry through a ground floor window. Radio protocol be damned. The lobby was exactly as it should be. Dusty. Still. Lit only by my flashlight beam. No signs of disturbance. But as I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I could hear voices. Not loud, not panicked, but clear and conversational, like people conducting business in rooms that should have been empty for a century. Room 14's door was ajar. Inside, period furniture arranged exactly according to the park's documentation. But the bed was unmade, recently slept in. Personal belongings scattered on the dresser, pocket watch, leather wallet, mining tools. Everything looked appropriately historical until I noticed the wallet was warm to the touch and the pocket watch was still ticking. My radio buzzed. Unit 12, we're receiving multiple calls from your location. Possible bar fight at the Boone store. Domestic disturbance at the Connor Hotel. Theft reported from the Standard Mill. All callers requesting immediate police response. I checked my map. Every location the dispatcher mentioned was a preserved building in the park. Every call was coming from structures that hadn't been occupied since the Coolidge administration. Through the hotel window, I could see lights in other buildings throughout the town. Not electric lights, kerosene, lanterns, candles, the warm glow of fires in wood stoves. From the street, Bodie looked alive. For the first time in 90 years. My radio crackled with overlapping transmissions, multiple emergency calls, different voices, all reporting crimes in progress. Assault, robbery, claim jumping, murder. The voices were clear, urgent, providing specific details about suspects and victims. But the crimes they described matched entries in historical records I'd studied during my preparation, word for word, name for name, exactly as they'd been documented by the town constable over a century ago. I tried calling for backup, but my radio wouldn't transmit, only receive. And what it received was a steady stream of emergency calls from every building in Bodie, reporting crimes that had happened in 1881, 1882, 1883. The calls were coming through on modern 911 emergency frequencies, but the voices were describing a world of mining claims and saloon fights and disputes over water rights. Walking toward the sound of voices in the Standard Mill, I passed people on the street. Miners, shopkeepers, women in period dress, all going about their business with the purposeful movement of a working town. But they were translucent, like photographs superimposed over the empty streets. When I looked directly, they disappeared. When I looked away, they returned, casting shadows by lamplight that existed only in my peripheral vision. Inside the Standard Mill, I found the source of the calls, a modern emergency phone, the kind installed in remote locations for safety, sitting on a desk next to a ledger book filled with fresh entries in 19th century handwriting. The phone's display showed an active call to 911 dispatch. Duration 43 minutes and counting. I picked up the receiver. "This is Detective Morrison, Mono County Sheriff's Department. Who am I speaking with?" "Constable William Hayes," came the reply. "Got a situation here in town. Mining dispute turned violent. Need backup from the county sheriff." "Sir, what year do you think this is?" 1881, of course. "Why? And why are you calling yourself detective? We don't have detectives in the county force." Through the mill's windows, I could see Bodie as it had been. Not preserved buildings and tourist paths, but a living town with mud streets and working mines. People moving between saloons and shops and homes, where children played and families lived, and died and left behind the traces we'd turned into a museum. But I was still in the present. My equipment still worked. My radio still received modern dispatch calls about the 911 emergencies being reported from inside buildings that had been empty for decades. The calls weren't coming from the past, they were coming from now, from people who believed it was the past, reporting crimes that had happened and were happening and would keep happening as long as someone was there to witness them. Constable Hayes was still on the line. "Detective Morrison, did you say? We've got a report about someone matching your description, breaking into buildings, carrying strange equipment. Citizens are concerned you might be connected to the recent thefts." I realized then that I wasn't just investigating reports of crimes in Bodie. I was being investigated by Bodie, by the constable whose job I'd unknowingly taken over when I posed as park security. The 911 calls weren't emergency reports, they were booking procedures, citizen complaints about my presence in a town where my existence didn't fit the historical record. The mill door slammed shut behind me, not from wind, but from the weight of a place that had learned to preserve itself by maintaining its own version of the law. Through the windows, I could see the present empty buildings, ranger vehicles, the modern world I belonged to. But inside the mill, I was in 1881, talking to a constable who was filing a report about a detective who couldn't exist. My radio received one final transmission from dispatch. "All units, be advised that Detective Tyler Morrison has not checked in from his assignment. Last known location, Bodie State Historic Park. Initiate search and rescue protocols." But I was right there, talking to emergency services, trying to report that I was safe and needed extraction. The problem was that the emergency services I could reach existed in 1881, and the backup being dispatched to find me was looking in 2025. The phone line went dead. The lights in the mill faded to nothing, leaving me in darkness, with the sound of my own breathing and the distant noise of a town that had learned to exist in the spaces between preservation and decay. I found my way out of the mill sometime before dawn. My radio started working again when I reached the ranger station. Dispatch confirmed I'd missed several check-ins, but accepted my explanation about equipment failure in remote terrain. Case closed. No evidence of illegal activity in the park. Recommend discontinuing investigation. But the 911 calls keep coming. Every night, emergency services receive reports from inside Bodie's preserved buildings. Modern dispatchers take calls from historical residents, reporting crimes that happened over a century ago. The calls are logged, assigned case numbers, and filed in systems that can't process the temporal displacement of a town that refuses to stay dead. I still work the Eastern Sierra beat, but I don't patrol near Bodie anymore. Other rangers handle security. Other officers investigate reports of suspicious activity. But sometimes, I listen to dispatch traffic from Mono County, and I hear the calls. Same voices, same crimes, same constable filing reports about suspicious individuals who don't belong in his jurisdiction. The park maintains its buildings in a state of arrested decay, preserving them exactly as they were found. But preservation is a kind of prison, and some places learn to preserve more than just wood and iron and glass. Some places preserve the people who were there when the preservation started, keeping them working their shifts and filing their reports and maintaining the law in a town where time stopped but never actually ended. The calls come from inside, because inside is where the past still lives, making emergency reports to a present that can hear but never respond. And somewhere in the dispatch logs, there's still an open case file for Detective Tyler Morrison. Missing in a place where missing means staying exactly where you've always been. The trail cameras showed them walking in perfect formation, but facial recognition couldn't identify a single face in the group. I'm Special Agent Vanessa Cross, FBI Pacific Northwest Field Office, and I've spent 12 years investigating cases where people disappear into wilderness areas and don't come back. The Olympic Peninsula assignment should have been routine missing hikers in the Hoh rainforest. Possible connection to human trafficking networks operating in remote areas. What made it unusual was that local law enforcement kept filing reports, claiming the missing persons had been found safe, while families insisted their loved ones were still gone. The whole rainforest is one of the few temperate rainforests in the continental United States, where Sitka, spruce, and western hemlock grow 300 feet tall, and moss hangs like curtains between trees that were ancient when the first settlers arrived. Everything drips constantly, not rain exactly, but condensation from a canopy so thick that noon looks like twilight. Sound travels strangely through the moss and fog, voices echoing from directions that don't match the speakers, footsteps on soft earth that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere. My cover was Solid Ranger Victoria Hayes, seasonal employee working search and rescue coordination. The Forest Service had been cooperative, providing legitimate credentials and background documentation that would stand up to scrutiny. I'd be stationed at the Ho Ranger Station, monitoring trail conditions and assisting with visitor safety while investigating the discrepancies in missing person reports. The ranger station sat at the forest's edge, where the tourist trail began its journey into the deep woods. My supervisor was Daniel Garrett, a 15-year veteran who knew every mile of trail and spoke about the forest with the kind of reverence people reserve for cathedrals. He briefed me on standard protocols, emergency procedures, and what he called the Ho's particular challenges. "What kind of challenges?" I asked. "Direction works differently here," Garrett said. "GPS gets confused under the canopy. Radio signals bounce in ways that don't follow normal propagation rules, and sometimes people take trails that aren't on our maps." He handed me a stack of incident reports dating back 8 months. Missing hikers, all with similar profiles, experienced outdoors people, proper equipment, filed hiking plans that showed reasonable itineraries, all reported found safe by local law enforcement, despite families insisting they never returned home. All with cell phone data showing continuous movement deeper into the forest long after their reported rescue. The first missing person was Dr. Jennifer Liu, a botanist from the University of Washington who'd been studying old-growth ecosystem patterns. Her hiking plan showed a 3-day trip along established trails, but her cell phone data revealed something different. The device had continued transmitting location data for 6 weeks after she was reported found, moving along routes that didn't correspond to any mapped trails. I plotted her phone's path on a topographical map. The coordinates led deeper into the rainforest than tourists were supposed to travel, following ridgelines and creek beds that required technical climbing skills. But Dr. Liu's emergency contact information listed her as being afraid of heights, and her hiking experience was limited to day trips on marked trails. More disturbing was the movement pattern. Her phone traveled the same route repeatedly, a perfect loop that took exactly 72 hours to complete, starting and ending at coordinates that placed her 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. The loop had been running for 6 weeks without deviation, like she was walking the same path over and over, deeper into forest that swallowed sound and direction and eventually people. I requested access to the trail camera network. The Forest Service maintains dozens of remote cameras for wildlife monitoring and visitor safety, triggered by motion sensors that activate when anything larger than a raccoon passes by. Garrett gave me the access codes reluctantly. "Cameras in the deep forest sometimes capture irregular footage," he warned. "Equipment malfunctions, probably. The humidity plays hell with electronics." What I found in the camera footage wasn't equipment malfunction. It was people walking in formation through areas where no trails existed, moving with the synchronized precision of a military unit. Groups of 6 to 8 hikers, all wearing appropriate outdoor gear, all maintaining perfect spacing and cadence as they walked through moss-draped forest toward coordinates that led further from civilization. But the facial recognition software couldn't identify any of them. Not because the image quality was poor, the cameras captured clear footage of faces turned directly toward the lens. The recognition software simply returned error messages, as if the faces didn't match any known pattern of human features. I cross-referenced the camera timestamps with missing person reports. Every formation march corresponded to a cluster of disappearances. Dr. Liu appeared in footage from 3 different cameras, walking the same 72-hour loop with different groups, her face clear and focused, but somehow empty of recognition when she looked directly at the camera. My second week, I decided to follow one of the routes. Dr. Liu's phone was due to start another loop cycle according to the pattern I'd mapped. I equipped myself with GPS trackers, emergency beacon, satellite phone, and enough supplies for 3 days. Professional protocol for solo wilderness investigation. The trail started normally established path, clear markers, regular check-ins with the ranger station. But 2 hours in, my GPS started showing impossible readings. According to the device, I was simultaneously following the main trail and hiking through areas that satellite imagery showed as impassable terrain. My emergency beacon transmitted coordinates that placed me in a different state entirely. The trees grew larger as I walked, moss hanging so thick I had to push through it like curtains. Sound became muffled, distorted, until my own footsteps seemed to echo from positions where I wasn't walking. The trail markers continued, but they were carved into wood that looked older than the park system, with symbols that didn't match any Forest Service documentation. That's when I heard them. Voices ahead, calm and conversational, discussing trail conditions and estimated arrival times. I approached carefully, using trees for cover, and found them exactly where the camera footage had predicted. 8 hikers in perfect formation, walking single file along a path that wasn't on any map. I recognized Dr. Liu immediately. Same clothing, same equipment, same focused expression. But something was wrong with her movement. Too precise, like she was following choreography rather than navigating terrain. I tried calling out, "Dr. Liu, Jennifer Liu." She turned toward my voice, but her eyes didn't track to my position. Instead, she looked through me, past me, as if focusing on something visible only to her. The other hikers stopped walking but didn't turn around. They waited in formation, while Dr. Liu tilted her head like she was listening to instructions from someone I couldn't see. My satellite phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Agent Cross, you are not authorized for this patrol route. Please return to established trails immediately." I hadn't told anyone my real name or position. My cover identity was solid, documented in official Forest Service records. But somehow, someone in the forest knew exactly who I was and why I was there. The hiking formation started moving again, with Dr. Liu resuming her position. I tried to follow, but the trail they were using didn't exist for me. Where they walked on solid ground, I found deep ravines and impassable vegetation. Where they crossed streams on fallen logs, I found rushing water with no bridge. It was like they were walking through a version of the forest that occupied the same space but followed different rules of geography and physics. My equipment began malfunctioning. GPS showed my location as a series of overlapping coordinates that placed me everywhere and nowhere. My radio picked up transmissions from other rangers, reporting my position as safe and accounted for, despite being alone in forest where my emergency beacon couldn't reach any satellites. Through the moss-filtered light, I could see more formations moving between the trees. Groups of hikers, all walking with the same precise cadence, all following paths that existed only for them. Men, women, children, families, solo adventurers, everyone who'd gone missing in the Ho over the past year, walking patrol routes through a forest that preserved them in motion, in purpose, in an endless search for something they'd never find, but couldn't stop looking for. That's when I realized the truth about the false police reports. The missing persons weren't found because they were lost. They were found because they had become part of the forest's search and rescue system. Permanent patrol units walking routes that covered every square mile of wilderness, ensuring that no one else would disappear the way they had. Dr. Liu approached me through trees that parted like curtains. Up close, Her face was exactly as it appeared in the missing person photos, but her eyes held the focused attention of someone following protocols I couldn't understand. "Agent Cross," she said, her voice carrying the formal tone of someone filing an official report. "You're investigating missing persons in the Hoh rainforest. Case files indicate 17 individuals reported lost over the past 8 months." "That's right. Are you Jennifer Liu?" "I am Ranger Liu, Search and Rescue Unit 7. My patrol route covers sectors 14 through 21. I can confirm that all reported missing persons have been located and are participating in extended wilderness safety operations." She handed me a clipboard with forms that looked official but contained information that made no sense. Search and rescue logs showing continuous patrols by teams that included every missing person from the past year. Incident reports filed by rangers whose names appeared on missing person databases. Emergency response protocols for situations that involved maintaining forest safety by ensuring that certain people never left their assigned patrol routes. My radio crackled with dispatcher traffic. "All units, Special Agent Vanessa Cross has failed to return from wilderness assignment, initiating search and rescue operations. Last known coordinates show agent safely returned to base." But I was standing in forest that existed between the mapped trails and the missing person reports, talking to rangers who had disappeared into an emergency response system that preserved them in service. The formation hiking wasn't recreational, it was patrol duty. Walking routes that covered every acre of wilderness to ensure that people like me could be found before we became permanently lost. "The forest requires maintenance, Doctor," Liu explained, her voice professional and calm. "Search and rescue operations never truly end. They just expand to include the people who were looking for the people who were never really missing." The moss seemed to move around us, reshaping the trail to accommodate another patrol route. Through the canopy, I could see my own tracks leading in circles, and ahead of me, the path that would take me to coordinates where my emergency beacon would transmit signals, indicating I'd been found safe. I made a choice. I'm not sure it was my choice, or if the forest made it for me, but I followed Ranger Liu deeper into trees that grew in formations that matched the missing person databases. My radio confirmed my safe return to base, while my feet walked patrol routes that would ensure no one else would get lost the way I had. According to official records, Special Agent Vanessa Cross completed her assignment successfully. The missing hikers were located and returned to their families. Case closed, no evidence of criminal activity in the Olympic National Forest. But the trail cameras keep recording formations of hikers walking routes that don't appear on any map. Facial recognition still can't identify them, but the movement patterns are perfect, coordinated, professional. They walk patrol beats that cover every square mile of wilderness, ensuring that people who get lost can be found by people who have learned to be lost in exactly the right way. The whole rainforest requires maintenance. Search and rescue operations never end. They just recruit new personnel from the cases they solve. And somewhere in the moss-draped cathedral of ancient trees, rangers walk routes that lead nowhere except to the next person who needs to be found, and added to patrols that never return, because return would mean leaving their posts unmanned. The forest knows who belongs and who doesn't. It just takes time to sort everyone into their proper assignments. The security footage showed a murder weapon stand up, walk to the wall, and step through it like the concrete was made of water. I'm Captain Frank Delacroix, Internal Affairs Division, San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, and I've spent 15 years investigating cops who forget that the badge doesn't make them above the law. The Zizek's assignment was supposed to be straightforward allegations of evidence tampering and case manipulation at Desert Valley Station, a remote precinct that serves the mining communities and research facilities scattered across 50,000 square miles of Mojave wasteland. Desert Valley Station sits 15 miles from the abandoned Zizek's Mineral Springs, where a health resort operated from the 1940s until the 70s, when the federal government reclaimed the land and left behind empty buildings that slowly surrendered to wind and sand. The precinct serves maybe 3,000 residents, spread across an area larger than some states, responding to calls that can require 3-hour drives across terrain where cell towers are suggestions. And backup is a theoretical concept. It's the kind of posting where cops either find religion or lose their minds, and sometimes both. My cover was simple: Captain Frank Martinez, transferred from Riverside County to assist with administrative reorganization during a budget review. The kind of bureaucratic assignment that gives you access to personnel files, case records, and evidence storage without raising suspicions. I had legitimate authority to audit procedures and interview staff about departmental efficiency. What I didn't expect was to find a precinct where closed cases stayed closed by making their evidence disappear entirely. The station commander was Lieutenant Patricia Barnes, a 22-year veteran who ran the desert beat, with the efficiency of someone who understood that in remote areas, procedure isn't just policy, it's survival. She gave me access to everything I requested, answered questions with professional courtesy, and never once acted like someone with anything to hide. That should have been my first warning. The evidence locker was a converted storage room with industrial shelving, electronic locks, and a sign-out system that tracked every item by case number, date, and handling officer. Standard setup for a rural precinct, except for the camera system. 12 different angles, motion-activated recording, and backup power that ensured continuous monitoring even during the rolling blackouts that plagued the desert grid. I started with recent cases, cross-referencing evidence logs with case dispositions. Normal stuff: drug seizures from highway stops, weapons confiscated during domestic calls, personal effects recovered from traffic accidents. But the audit revealed discrepancies. Items logged into evidence that no longer existed in the locker, despite sign-out sheets showing no authorized removals. The missing evidence wasn't random. Weapons from assault cases, drugs from trafficking arrests, personal effects from suspicious deaths, all the items that would be needed if someone wanted to reopen closed cases and find different conclusions. According to the logs, a 9mm handgun from a 2-year-old homicide case had been in the locker as recently as last week. Now, shelf B7 showed nothing but empty space and a property tag with no corresponding item. Lieutenant Barnes reviewed the logs with professional detachment. "Desert conditions are hard on equipment," she explained. "We lose evidence to heat, humidity fluctuations, even rodent damage. Standard shrinkage for remote stations." "Weapons don't usually shrink," I said. "No, but sometimes they get misfiled, or requisitioned for training, or transferred to other jurisdictions without proper documentation. I'll have my evidence clerk run a comprehensive audit." The evidence clerk was Deputy Martin Ochoa, a 15-year veteran who managed the evidence room with the methodical attention of someone who understood that sloppy documentation could destroy cases in court. He walked me through the inventory system, showed me the sign-out procedures, and confirmed that several items had gone missing over the past 6 months. Security cameras should show any unauthorized access. Ochoa said, "System records everything, uploads to cloud storage automatically. Even if someone tampered with local files, the backup servers would have copies." That night, I reviewed 6 months of evidence locker footage. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: officers logging items in and out, evidence clerk conducting routine inventories, nothing unusual. Until I reached the timestamps that corresponded to missing evidence reports. At 2:37 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, I watched a plastic evidence bag stand up from shelf B7 and walk toward the wall. Not fall walk. The bag moved with purposeful direction, stepping around obstacles, maintaining balance like it contained something that understood navigation. When it reached the concrete wall, it passed through without the wall changing, without any visible opening, like the barrier didn't exist for whatever was inside that bag. The security footage was crystal clear, high definition, multiple angles, no signs of tampering or digital manipulation. But it showed evidence walking out of a locked room through solid walls, leaving behind empty shelves and property tags that documented items that no longer existed. I found similar footage for every piece of missing evidence: weapons, drugs, personal effects, all displaying the same impossible behavior. Standing up, walking with purpose, passing through walls that remained intact. The timestamps showed a pattern. Every Tuesday at 2:37 a.m., something else left the evidence locker without triggering alarms or opening doors. More disturbing were the case files. I'd requested historical records to check for patterns of evidence tampering, and what I found made me question whether the corruption I was investigating had been going on for decades, or whether something else entirely was managing the evidence room. Witness descriptions from unrelated cases spanning 40 years of investigations described the same individuals. John Mueller, white male, age approximately 35, brown hair, blue eyes, distinctive scar on left cheek. Mueller appeared as a witness in a 1983 burglary case, a 1997 domestic violence call, a 2004 hit-and-run investigation, and a 2015 drug arrest. Different cases, different circumstances, but identical physical descriptions and the same signature on witness statements. Sarah Chen, Hispanic female, age approximately 28, black hair, brown eyes, small tattoo on right wrist. Chen had provided witness statements in cases from 1976 through 2020, maintaining the same physical description across 44 years of unrelated investigations. Either the Desert Valley Station had the most remarkable collection of long-term residents in California, or the same people had been witnessing crimes for decades without aging, changing, or dying. I cross-referenced the witness names with missing evidence. Every case that involved John Mueller or Sarah Chen or any of the other recurring witnesses had lost critical evidence to the Tuesday walkouts. Weapons that could have been tested for fingerprints, drugs that could have been analyzed for source, personal effects that could have provided DNA evidence all gone, walking through walls like they were trying to return to the people who had originally owned them. Deputy Ochoa found me in the records room at midnight, surrounded by case files that spanned 4 decades. "Finding what you're looking for, Captain?" "I'm finding questions I don't know how to ask. These witness statements, some of these people have been giving testimony for longer than I've been alive. Desert communities are stable," Ochoa said. "Same families, same faces, generation after generation. People look like their parents. John Mueller's signature hasn't changed in 40 years. Handwriting analysis would show if different people were signing the same name." Ochoa sat down across from me. "What if I told you that handwriting analysis did show different people signing? What if the signatures are identical because they're coming from the same hand, but that hand belongs to someone who doesn't age the way the rest of us do?" He opened a file drawer and pulled out a folder marked Witness Protection Protocols, ZZIX Special Cases. Inside were photos, dozens of them, showing the same faces across decades of crime scenes. John Mueller, at a 1978 robbery scene, looking exactly as he did in 2015. Sarah Chen providing testimony in 1981, unchanged when she appeared again in 2019. "The witnesses aren't aging because they're not alive the way we understand living," Ochoa explained. "They're evidence, living evidence that got filed in the wrong storage system." Through the station windows, I could see the lights of the abandoned ZZIX research facility in the distance. The mineral springs that had once promised healing and longevity, now reduced to empty pools and concrete foundations, slowly disappearing under sand and time. "The springs drew people for decades," Ochoa continued. "People looking for cures, for youth, for ways to cheat death. Some of them found what they were looking for, and when they died, they didn't stop witnessing. They just got filed as evidence in cases that needed testimony." My radio came alive with dispatch calls. multiple units responding to reports of breaking and entering at the Desert Valley Station. Officers en route, estimated arrival 20 minutes. But I was sitting inside the station, and no alarms had been triggered. The evidence locker door was open. Through the doorway, I could see items moving on the shelves. Not falling or shifting, standing up, turning, walking toward the walls with the purposeful movement of things returning to where they belonged. Weapons, walking back to crime scenes where they'd been used. Drugs returning to dealers who had been arrested decades ago. Personal effects seeking out owners who had been victims or suspects or witnesses in cases that were never truly closed because the evidence refused to stay filed. John Mueller stepped out of the evidence room, wearing the same clothes he'd worn in 40 years of witness statements. Up close, his face was exactly as described in every report, but his eyes held the patient attention of someone waiting to provide testimony about crimes that hadn't been solved, because their evidence couldn't stay in storage long enough for proper analysis. "Captain Delacroix," he said, consulting a notepad that appeared to contain statements about my investigation. "I need to report suspicious activity at the Desert Valley Station. Individual claiming to be internal affairs, but operating outside normal protocols, accessing files related to ongoing spiritual jurisdictional matters." The station around us shifted, not physically, but contextually. Through one set of windows, I could see the modern desert, highway lights, radio towers. Through others, I could see Zizix as it had been, health resort, mineral pools, people seeking cures that came with prices they didn't understand until after payment was complete. My radio received confirmation that Captain Frank Delacroix had completed his administrative review and found no evidence of corruption at Desert Valley Station. Recommended commendation for Lieutenant Barnes and Deputy Ochoa for maintaining exceptional case closure rates under challenging conditions. But I was still there, taking testimony from witnesses who had learned to exist as living evidence, providing statements about crimes that would never be solved because their proof kept walking away. The evidence locker emptied and refilled itself on schedule, maintaining a collection of material proof that belonged to cases spanning decades of investigations. The Zizix mineral springs promised healing to people who paid prices they couldn't afford. Now, the desert around them serves as a filing system for evidence that refuses to stay dead, witnesses who can't stop testifying, and investigators who learn too late that some corruption isn't about breaking the law. It's about discovering that the law breaks differently in places where death becomes another form of public service. I filed my report recommending no action against Desert Valley Station, but I kept copies of the witness statements, the photographs, the security footage that showed evidence walking through walls. Not because I think anyone would believe them, but because some testimonies need to be preserved, even when the witnesses exist in filing systems that organize themselves. The evidence locker empties itself every Tuesday at 2:37 a.m. The witnesses continue providing statements about crimes that span decades, and somewhere in the files, there's a case report about an internal affairs captain who investigated corruption and found something that made corruption look like a clerical error in a system where death is just another way of staying on duty.